And with all the attention rightfully being paid to the Trump administration's inhumane policy of separating children from their parents and mistreating them in other ways, policy which is by no means clarified yet despite the executive order, it seemed like an excellent time to call on our friend, Dr. Sanjeev Shriram, better known as Dr. America, host of the Dr. America program. As you know, if you've seen him on the show before, Sanjeev is a pediatrician. He is also, in my view, the ultimate kind of holistic doctor, which is the kind who recognizes the holistic need for care of the whole person, but also the fact that truly holistic care involves the society as a whole as well. At least that's the way I would reflect on his outlook. Perhaps he can refine that description for me. But he is also behind a very, I think, a well thought out action protesting that pattern of behavior by Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump of separating children from their parents. And he joins us now to talk about all of the above. So first of all, Sanjeev, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
Secondly, so tell folks who might not know about your recent action, the one I was referencing.
Yeah. So on Friday, I, like almost everybody else, have seen the news, have watched what's going on at the U.S. border, and I felt that this qualifies as child abuse. And as a pediatrician, I'm mandated by law that when I see it, when I hear it, I must report child abuse to Child Protective Services. So I picked up the phone, called the Child Protective Services hotline in D.C., and asked them whether anybody else had made a report on the Trump regime's abuse of immigrant children, because I would like to make a report. And the woman was who I spoke to was, very polite, very understanding, and explained to me that the district's Child Protective Services agency only has jurisdiction in the district. And she said that if I wanted to file a report, that I would have to find other authorities. I accepted her explanation just because I feel that she, like most people at a CPS agency, are doing the best that they can within the jurisdiction that they've been given. So, but I did feel angry enough at the circumstances of these children that I put my feelings into words and wrote an op-ed, which the other 98 was gracious enough to publish. And I just relayed my experience and why I felt this was child abuse, why there are health consequences for the trauma that these children are enduring, and how I felt that Congress needed to respond with the kind of diligence and urgency that pediatricians respond with when they are confronting child abuse. And I wrote the article. It got a much bigger response than I was expecting. I'm always glad to see my fellow Americans get fired up with the same passion that I feel for children who are in trouble. But I got a lot of responses and questions about, okay, what are you going to do next, Doc? And I decided that, well, I was told to speak with other authorities, and so yesterday I called up a couple of my colleagues, and together we walked the halls of the U.S. Senate, trying to find people who would respond to child abuse at the U.S. border.
So I'm always fascinated by just kind of as a political activist and writer, by what clicks and what doesn't, what resonates in the public mind and what doesn't. And this did very clearly, and to me, one of the reasons why it did is because we think of politics as taking place outside the realm of our daily lives. We see them as two different planes of existence, and one we can sort of influence, one we can't. And I think this was kind of an intersection of the planes. This was all of a sudden, I mean, I think of all the great political actions of the past, Abby Hoffman throwing dollar bills down on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. People are like, yeah, the kind of the bills that are in my pocket, it's the same money that they're doing.
Right.
The doctor who can report if somebody is mistreating their kid is the same doctor who can report that the authorities are mistreating thousands of them at the border. And I think one of the reasons why it resonated was it took this vast universe out there and brought it into human scope, if that makes sense to you.
Well, I think that I think it does make sense, and I think it's the kind of thing where people are used to their day-to-day healthcare providers acting with urgency, and I think that I felt that urgency is what has been sorely lacking in helping these kids, and I felt that I know what urgency looks like in my day job, and I know what diligence looks like, and I'm going to bring that and just transfer it over to this space. And I had no idea what kind of response I would get or how things would transpire, but I felt that I don't really need to know that in order to take action, and that's kind of what motivated me. And I feel like people like to see like less hand wringing and more just a willingness to act without having to, calculate every possible consequence.
Well, I think that's right, and I think the other dimension of this, and I think it's important, is that, and I'm always somehow trying to reach this in my writing too, which is that immoral behavior is immoral behavior,
right,
whether it's done by an elected official or a parent slapping their child. And I think it had that kind of clarity to it that just said, wait a minute, this is abuse.
Right.
To tear a child, a 5-year-old child, from parents' arms, to refuse to allow two brothers to touch or hug
right,
each other,
right,
that this is such immensely cruel behavior. It is no different than if you saw somebody on the street terrifying and mistreating a child, and it should be treated no differently.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that it's government sanctioned child abuse. And one of the things that I've started to feel very motivated by was when I saw other doctors using that kind of language. And a few weeks ago, there's a scientist named Nadine Burke Harris. She's a pediatrician, and her study and focus is on toxic stress and how do the toxic stresses in our life, whether that be a parent losing a job or a parent being displaced by violence and civil war, how does all of that impact children? And the science is pretty clear that we see changes in brain structures, we see changes in hormone levels, stress hormones, and ultimately organ systems. And so the health consequences are real. And when she was she spoke in Washington, D.C. earlier this month, and she said that what was happening at the border is no different than a chemical bomb being dropped on these communities. That's how severe the toxic stress is on these kids. And so when you have pediatricians saying that it's as bad as a chemical bomb, it's government sanctioned child abuse, that isn't hyperbole. It's actually like we're trying to raise urgency in the public and among our political leaders to respond with more than what we've seen so far.
And it's actually science. I mean, that's the other piece of it, is that we hear so much in the media and so on that's quasi-science.
Right.
While this is real science.
Yeah.
And I guess there's so many ways we could take this conversation, but one of the things that strikes me is, and this is by no means diminishing the urgency of the immigration situation, is that there's so many other ways that we are literally doing violence to children in this country on a daily basis. You alluded to one of them, to that study. There was another study done recently about families who were given housing vouchers. Mm-hmm. Some of them used the vouchers to stay in very stressful, what we might call inner city or ghetto environments, and others were given vouchers that allowed them to go into more middle-class neighborhoods. And there are differences in lifetime differences in earning power, lifetime differences in learning ability. Mm-hmm. And these, people, in this case, it's speculation, but I think well-grounded speculation that the physiological changes that have been documented from living, whether it's the environmental pollution, the constant threat of violence, and what that does, which you were alluding to, what that does physiologically, the difficulty accessing nutritious foods, and I'm probably missing a number of other factors as well, that in effect, aren't we all, I guess I look to something like the immigration situation, this abuse of children, not only to stop the abuse, but to see if this can be a teaching moment for other ways that we can understand that we are abusing children.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely. And I think, one of the questions that I've been confronted with by a lot of people, and of course, I mean, there's any number of whatabouts that happen when you're talking about immigrant children. But one of the whatabouts that I got was, well, what about children here? What about, you're talking, because one of my solutions, one of the things that I am pushing for is a policy remedy that needs to be incorporated into any immigration policy, any immigration action, is comprehensive medical care, including full mental health services for every child that is at the border. And one of the whatabouts I get is that, well, what about kids here? They don't, like, all of them don't get that. And my whatabout is a whatabout right back at them. Well, what about every child in America, not getting full comprehensive medical care is their basic human right? What about the fact that 67% of children who are uninsured in America right now, they are eligible but not enrolled in programs that would give them their basic human right of health care? So to me, I'm not saying that we need to pit children against each other. This isn't about, pitting children with one country of origin with children with a different country of origin. It should be that, as our fellow human beings, we owe this to each other, that healthcare is a basic human right. Decency is something that shouldn't be such a heavy lift as grown-ups and as so-called civilized people. And that, I think that, that's, to me, is like, it's amazing how, like, difficult our politics are making what should be very simple moral questions.
I think it's such a fantastic point. And again, we're talking with Sanjeev Sriram, Dr. America, physician and broadcaster. To me, it's so important because I think that so many of the people who make that argument, that what about, well, what about our, American kids, that very few of them, if they were confronted with a child who was being abused, or a child who was hungry, or a child who needed a roof over his head, I've known some of those people. They wouldn't turn away.
Right.
They would say, of course, here's a hungry child, here's, but there's something in our politics, as long as we're speaking about public health, I wonder if there isn't a kind of epidemic of moral blindness in our politics that causes so many millions of people. I'm not going to call them evil people. I don't think they're all evil. I think a lot of them are in their personal lives good people. But somehow they've been inculcated with a transmissible moral blindness that prevents them from doing. Why are you saying, oh, I should let this kid starve because this kid is starving? Isn't the answer to feed both kids?
Right. And the thing of it is that I think that those of us who are closer to those children, see that as like a relatively simple thing, and it's not difficult for us to reach that conclusion. What I think is happening is that you have some very powerful people in this country who know that the most effective weapon against dismantling an oligarchy is to turn people against each other. And that is where you have them, try to turn a lot of us against each other, such that we're saying things like, well, before this person, you give them Medicaid, you should check their work. Before you give them anything like a food stamp, what kind of job are they doing? Are they working hard enough? Do they, quote unquote, deserve it? And that right there, we have to understand that we've been put into a false choice, and it's a very deliberate process by people who are powerful and know that if we were to look at each other and say that, food, housing, healthcare, these are basic human rights. And these aren't difficult things for us to provide for each other in the richest country in the world. And the richest people in the richest country in the world owe us their contribution to make these things real. And I think that that is the challenge for everyday Americans, is to understand where you're getting played into, pitting ourselves against each other, and that the answer isn't that hard of a reach if we just redirect our focus.
Yeah, I mean, I think given that we live in a country where, one billionaire has $24 billion, another one has enough money to shoot one of his cars into space with a mannequin sitting in the driver's seat, that, yeah, we have the money to do. It's not a matter of money. It's a matter of commitment.
Right.
And it's a matter of healing this moral blindness,
Right.
so that people can see we can do it, we should do it, and we will do it.
Absolutely. And I feel that, we have to also have these conversations with our so-called allies. I mean, Howard Schultz, former CEO of Starbucks, whining and complaining about how are you going to pay for Medicare for all? Like, you guys need to stop talking about that. You need to, get off of that. To me, I'm kind of like, Howard, life's been good to you. And and it's one of those things when you ask these kinds of things, it's a false choice of that we shouldn't be asking how do we, make healthcare a basic human right in this country versus like how do we afford it. To me, I feel like that's a very false choice, and people like Howard Schultz should know that, yeah, we are going to be asking him and demanding of him to pitch in more than he has so far.
Yeah, with all due respect, Howard Schultz knows how to make a good cappuccino.
Yeah.
He doesn't necessarily know how to make a good national healthcare system. We also have to start elevating these guys to a guru stature that they haven't earned. So unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, but I'm so glad you did this action. I'm proud of you, my friend.
Thank you.
And I'm so glad you came on the program to talk about it. Sanjeev Shriram, MD, pediatrician, Dr. America. Always great to talk to you.
Thanks.